It began with a scream. Not the kind you hear in a crowded stadium or a rowdy party, but a sharp, startled cry that cut through the thick Windsor air like shattered glass. The kind that makes every head turn, every heart freeze, every whisper die on the lips. That night, Princess Charlotte, the young royal the world had come to adore for her poise, her grace, her uncanny resemblance to her mother, stood trembling beside a woman the palace had already grown wary of, Meghan Markle. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What could have possibly made a child cry in a room filled with laughter, light, and royal charm? And more importantly, what did Meghan say that made even the most seasoned royal aides look away in stunned silence? This wasn't a story about misunderstanding. This was a moment that would ripple through the royal family like a shockwave. The night that changed everything between Prince William and Meghan Markle. The night that turned tolerance into exile. But let's rewind. Because to understand how things exploded that evening, you must first understand the years of quiet resentment, whispered warnings, and unseen tensions that had been building behind palace walls. The story of Meghan Markle's royal banishment didn't start with Charlotte's tears. It started the moment Meghan believed she could rewrite the rules of the monarchy, and that belief would eventually bring her face to face with the future king of England's fury. For years, William had bitten his tongue. Through the Oprah interview, through the Netflix docuseries, through the endless tabloid storms, he had remained silent. But silence has a limit. Even patience wears thin when your daughter is involved. And that night, when Charlotte's innocence collided with Meghan's pride, William's silence ended. Picture the setting, Windsor Castle. A private royal gathering, low-lit, intimate, meant to be a simple rehearsal dinner ahead of a formal event honoring one of the late Queen's charities. Children playing in the adjoining hall, adults mingling in quiet corners, champagne glasses clinking in polite rhythm. Nothing out of the ordinary, until it was. According to several insiders who spoke in hushed tones afterward, the tension between Meghan and Catherine had been noticeable even before Charlotte entered the room. Meghan had been unusually defensive, perhaps feeling overshadowed by the glowing warmth of the Princess of Wales, who carried herself with effortless grace. Every smile Catherine gave seemed to irritate Meghan. Every compliment directed toward her children felt like a comparison. And then came the spark. Charlotte, dressed in a delicate ivory dress, one she adored because it reminded her of the gown she'd worn as a bridesmaid years before, approached Meghan with the shy sweetness of an 8-year-old eager to help. What followed next is the stuff of royal legend. Whispered, denied, and then half admitted by those who couldn't unsee it. "Don't touch that," Meghan allegedly snapped, her tone sharper than the gleam of the chandeliers above. The room went quiet for a moment, just a flicker. But to a child, that tone was enough to wound. Charlotte froze. Catherine noticed immediately, and then Meghan, realizing she'd raised her voice, gave a forced laugh, the kind of brittle chuckle that fills silence but doesn't fix it. But by then, it was too late. The look on Charlotte's face said everything. Her lip quivered. Her eyes welled up. The laughter in the room faded like a dying echo. And as if the palace itself felt the shift, the mood turned cold. What happened next is still debated by those who were there. Some say Catherine quietly ushered Charlotte away, whispering comfort as she went. Others claim William stepped forward, his jaw tightening, his eyes locked on Meghan. What's not debated is what came after. The royal fallout that would see Meghan permanently banned from ever setting foot on certain royal grounds again. But here's where things take an even darker turn. Because this wasn't the first time Meghan had clashed with a royal child. There had been murmurs during her wedding preparations years earlier. Whispers of a tearful Charlotte and a furious bride-to-be. Back then, the palace brushed it off as a misunderstanding, a small quarrel over a dress fitting. But this was different. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a confrontation. And this time, William was there to witness it. You have to wonder. What could drive a future king to say enough? To declare, in no uncertain terms, that his sister-in-law was no longer welcome? Was it anger? Protection? Or a long overdue reckoning with a woman who had, for years, tested the boundaries of royal tolerance? The truth lies somewhere between hurt pride and protective fury. William, by all accounts, is not easily provoked. His calm is legendary. his restraint, learned from a lifetime under the world's watchful eye. But when it comes to his children, especially Charlotte, he's a different man. A father before a prince. A protector before a diplomat. And that night, the protector took over. Meghan, perhaps realizing her mistake too late, tried to smooth things over. But words, once spoken, can't be unspoken, especially in the monarchy, where decorum is everything and emotion is often viewed as weakness. She reached out, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to explain, but the gesture only deepened the divide. William stepped forward, and for the first time in years, his voice wasn't calm. It was firm, cold, final. Insiders claimed that the argument that followed was brief but explosive, a mix of suppressed frustration, betrayal, and disbelief. Meghan accused William of overreacting. William accused Meghan of disrespect. Catherine, ever the peacemaker, stood between them, her expression unreadable but her eyes full of quiet pain. And Charlotte? She had already left the room in tears. The sound of that small cry echoed through the castle halls long after it ended. For William, it wasn't just about a moment of temper. It was about what it symbolized. Meghan had crossed a line, not only with him, but with the very core of what the royal family stands for: dignity, restraint, and the protection of the next generation. And from that night forward, there would be no going back. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about the build-up, the storm before the lightning. Because this confrontation didn't happen in isolation. It was the result of years of whispers, hurt feelings, and unseen rivalries. Behind the smiles and photo ops, there had been tension simmering between Meghan and the Wales family for years. Meghan's insistence on independence, her repeated claims of mistreatment, and her public criticisms had worn down every ounce of goodwill that once existed. William had tolerated it for the sake of family unity, but every interview, every headline, every leak from Montecito chipped away at that fragile peace. And then there was Charlotte, the one person who symbolized everything Meghan was accused of disliking about royal life. The discipline, the formality, the image of innocence Meghan often claimed she'd lost in her own media war. For Meghan, being compared to Catherine was already unbearable. But being seen as cold or harsh toward Catherine's daughter, that was the one narrative she couldn't control, and she knew it. Which makes the events of that night even more catastrophic for her image and legacy. Still, something deeper drove this explosion. Those close to Meghan say she'd been feeling increasingly alienated, excluded from the family she once longed to be part of. She believed she was still owed respect, still entitled to a place in royal gatherings. But William saw it differently. To him, she was no longer a royal, no longer bound by loyalty or duty, and her behavior that night, in his eyes, confirmed it. The emotional irony? The woman who fought to be accepted by the royal family had, in one heated moment, solidified her permanent exclusion. It's said that after the altercation, William called a brief private meeting with his father. No aides, no cameras. Just two men who had weathered decades of royal scandal, now faced with another crisis. King Charles reportedly listened, expression heavy, fingers steepled beneath his chin. And when William was done, the king simply said, "Then it's time." Time for what? That's what no one outside the palace truly knows. But what followed in the days after tells its own story. Meghan was quietly removed from the guest list of multiple royal events. Her security clearance for palace access was revoked. Invitations ceased. Calls went unanswered. And though no official statement was ever made, one fact became clear through actions, not words. Meghan Markle was no longer welcome. A lifetime ban, issued not through decree, but through silence, the royal family's most potent weapon. And the public? They sensed something had shifted. The warmth between the families during brief reunions turned to frost. The smiles looked rehearsed. The body language said what the press releases wouldn't. Something had broken, and everyone knew it. But what about Charlotte? How did the young princess process that night? How did Catherine explain it to her? That's where the emotional weight of this story truly lies. A child, thrust into royal life, learning too soon that not everyone who smiles at you means you well. It's heartbreaking. It's human. And it's the reason William drew the line where he did. Because for him, this wasn't about Meghan the Duchess. It was about Meghan the adult, crossing a line with a child, his child. And that was unforgivable. Even now, whispers about what exactly happened that night continue to haunt the royal corridors. Some say Meghan's temper got the best of her after a minor misunderstanding. Others insist it was deeper, that it revealed who she truly was when the cameras weren't rolling. And perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. A woman under immense pressure, surrounded by people she never felt truly accepted her, finally snapping. But in the worst possible way, at the worst possible time, in front of the one person William would protect at any cost. What's undeniable is this. That night marked the end of any illusion of reconciliation between the Sussexes and the Wales family. Whatever bridges remained were burned. Whatever truce existed was shattered. And the fallout from that moment is still unfolding. Quietly, strategically, irrevocably. But here's the thing no one outside the palace expected. There may be proof. Hidden somewhere in the depths of royal security archives lies what some claim is a recording. A small snippet from a corner surveillance camera that caught the confrontation. Insiders whisper it exists, though few have seen it. And if it ever surfaced publicly, it could rewrite the royal narrative forever. Because what's on that tape, they say, isn't just an argument. It's the unfiltered truth of who Meghan became behind palace doors. But what exactly did that footage capture? And how did it become the royal family's most tightly guarded secret? That's where our story truly begins. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What really happened after that scream? What unfolded in the minutes after Charlotte's tears turned a quiet Windsor evening into the most whispered royal scandal of the decade? Let's go back to that room. The scent of lilacs from the garden drifting through the open windows, the murmur of polite conversation, the silver clinking of glasses, and the sudden, deafening silence that followed a child's cry. Everyone froze. For a moment, no one breathed. Catherine instinctively reached for her daughter, her face tightening into that polished composure only years of royal discipline could produce. Meghan stood there, her lips slightly parted, eyes wide. Not with remorse, but with the kind of disbelief that only comes when you realize you've gone too far in the wrong place. The look on William's face said everything. He wasn't just angry. He was changed. You know that split second when a person decides, deep in their soul, that there's no coming back? That was it. That was the moment the future King of England stopped seeing Meghan Markle as family and started seeing her as a problem that had to be solved. What could she have said to Charlotte? Was it really cruel? Was it simply a tone? Or was it the weight of everything leading up to that night? Months, maybe years, of tension spilling out in a flash of unfiltered frustration? Insiders say the incident wasn't about a word, but about intent. It wasn't what she said, one aide reportedly confided. It was how she said it. The look, the tone. It wasn't an aunt scolding a niece. It was something colder. Charlotte's tears set off a domino effect of emotion that no one could stop. Catherine guided her daughter out of the room with quiet urgency, whispering soothing words, but the damage was done. The guests, once cheerful, exchanged uneasy glances. The air thickened. Even the chandeliers seemed dimmer. And in that uneasy hush, William's chair scraped back against the polished floor. That sound, that low scrape, would later be described by a footman as the loudest noise in the room. William stood, his expression unreadable at first. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It was low, controlled, the kind of voice that makes people listen more carefully. What did you just say? You could have heard a pin drop. Meghan, perhaps realizing how far she'd gone, tried to explain herself. It was just a misunderstanding, she said softly. She was being a little disruptive. Disruptive. The word hung there, poisonous in the royal air. To call the future king's daughter disruptive, even if true, was an unthinkable breach of etiquette. Catherine's children were not merely children. They were symbols, living extensions of the monarchy's grace. And now, that symbol was standing in the hallway crying because of Meghan Markle. William's jaw tightened. His blue eyes locked on Meghan's face. She's a child, Meghan. That's all he said. But the tone, the cold, clipped restraint, carried an entire storm behind it. Everyone in that room knew it wasn't just about Charlotte anymore. What no one knew then was that security cameras had caught everything. Not in some secret, cinematic way, just routine palace surveillance meant to monitor guest movements. But that footage would later become the most closely guarded piece of royal evidence since Diana's letters. It would show more than words could describe. Body language, tension, and the breaking point of a royal alliance that had been crumbling since the day Meghan first walked into the family's inner circle. But before that recording became legend, the scene in that room unraveled in real time. Meghan stammered, trying to explain herself, to shift the focus away from Charlotte and back toward her own feelings. I didn't mean. I think everyone is misunderstanding what happened, she began. William took a step closer. Not aggressive, not loud, but final. You've done enough, he said. That's when Harry entered. Late, out of breath, completely unaware of what had just happened. What's going on? He asked, eyes darting between his brother and his wife. No one answered. Catherine's absence spoke volumes. The staff had already moved quietly, ushering guests to nearby rooms, pretending to tend to details that didn't need tending. The castle, usually a place of controlled ceremony, now felt like a stage set for disaster. Harry approached Meghan, confusion turning to defensiveness as he sensed the hostility in the air. If there's a problem, we can talk about it. There's nothing left to talk about, William interrupted. It wasn't a yell. It was something worse, a pronouncement. Calm, but sharp. It cut straight through Harry's words. The silence after was painful. You can imagine the irony here, can't you? The brothers who once stood shoulder to shoulder at their mother's memorial now stood divided by a child's tears. And in the middle of it all, Meghan, eyes glistening, torn between indignation and disbelief. Harry tried again. Will, please. It's just a misunderstanding. Then go and misunderstand it somewhere else, William said quietly. That line, harsh, clipped, deliberate, has been quoted in private retellings by several sources since that night. It marked the moment things shifted from a family disagreement to royal consequence. Meghan didn't respond. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she realized the point of no return had been crossed. She turned away, hand trembling slightly as she adjusted her dress, and muttered something under her breath, something that witnesses recall made William's face turn to stone. No one's ever confirmed what she said. Some claim it was a sarcastic jab. Others insist it was something about Charlotte being spoiled, a mini-queen in training. Whatever it was, that was it. That was the final straw. Catherine returned then, her hand resting protectively on Charlotte's shoulder. The little girl's cheeks were blotchy from crying. She clung to her mother's arm, looking small and fragile against the grandeur of the palace walls. William's eyes softened when he saw his daughter, then hardened again as they flicked back to Meghan. We're leaving, he said simply, turning to Catherine. And just like that, they were gone. The aftermath was chaos hidden behind decorum. Palace aides scrambled to manage whispers. Guests were told the Wales family had to attend to a private matter. Meghan, visibly shaken, left shortly afterward with Harry, her face pale, but her expression unreadable. The next morning, the whispers began. Staff corridors buzzed. Did you hear? One butler whispered. She made the princess cry. The story twisted and spread like wildfire through the palace. Not the media, not yet. Just within those walls that had seen 1,000 secrets and scandals before. But this one felt different. Personal. Immediate. Dangerous. Because this wasn't just another rift between royal adults. This was an offense against a child. And that changed everything. Behind the scenes, King Charles was informed almost immediately. His private secretary delivered a short report. Incident at Windsor involving the Duchess of Sussex and Princess Charlotte. Emotional distress observed. The king reportedly sighed and rubbed his temples before saying only, of course it was. But here's where things get interesting. No official reprimand came that day. No statement. No orders. Instead, there was silence. Strategic silence. The palace, as always, knew the value of letting emotions cool before taking action. But William didn't cool. If anything, his anger hardened into resolve. Days later, when the family reconvened for a smaller engagement, Meghan's name was conspicuously absent from the guest list. It wasn't a clerical error. It was the beginning of her quiet erasure. You see, in the monarchy, punishment rarely comes in the form of confrontation. It comes through omission, the vanishing of privileges, the silent closing of doors that once opened easily. Meghan's security access was flagged for review. Invitations to royal charity events stopped arriving. The messaging was clear. She was being frozen out. And yet, she didn't stay silent. In Montecito, a flurry of activity began. Meghan's publicist reached out to certain media contacts, hinting that unfounded rumors were being spread about an incident involving Charlotte. The aim was to control the narrative before it spread. But that very act, trying to get ahead of it, made palace insiders furious. Because now, the story that was supposed to stay confined within Windsor's walls was leaking into the outside world. And the moment it did, William moved fast. One evening, according to insiders, he called his father and said, "I'm done pretending. She's not coming back. Not to this family. Not to this country. Not ever. A lifetime ban. Not in writing, not on paper, but in every royal gesture that followed." Meghan Markle was no longer welcome on royal grounds. But here's the part most people don't know. That night at Windsor wasn't the first time Charlotte had been reduced to tears because of Meghan. It had happened before, years earlier, in the lead-up to Harry and Meghan's wedding. Remember those early whispers about the bridesmaid's dress? The tabloids called it the crying incident. Some said Meghan made Catherine cry. Others insisted it was the reverse. But what if both were wrong? What if the real tears came from a little girl caught between them? That night may have been history repeating itself. Only this time, there was no forgiving it. And what about Harry? He found himself trapped in a nightmare of his own making, torn between defending his wife and protecting the remnants of his relationship with his brother. The tension between the two men escalated quickly. Texts were ignored. Calls went unanswered. What had started as an argument over tone and temper spiraled into a permanent rift between two futures, one royal, one exiled. But what really sealed Meghan's fate wasn't the argument itself. It was what came after, because someone, somewhere, had seen something they shouldn't have and captured it. Footage, a recording from that very night. No one in the public has seen it, of course, but it exists, tucked away in palace archives, reviewed only by a select few. Insiders say it's not explosive because of violence or aggression, but because of words, the kind that reveal the raw, unfiltered truth of what the royal family had been trying to hide. And those words, once spoken, can never be unheard. So what did the footage show? What exactly did Meghan say that night that forced William to draw the final line? You're about to find out. Because the next chapter isn't about whispers anymore. It's about evidence. And the moment the crown decided to protect its own, no matter the cost. But what came next would make even royal insiders question everything they thought they knew. And no one, not even Meghan herself, saw it coming. Have you ever seen a child's innocence collapse in real time? It doesn't make a sound, not at first. It's just the stillness, the silence after a breaking point. That's how witnesses described the moment Princess Charlotte left that Windsor room, her small frame quivering, her hands clutching the folds of her mother's gown as they slipped through a side door into the corridor. The palace might have been full of golden light and polite laughter moments before, but the second Charlotte's tears began to fall, that same air turned heavy, suffocating, haunted. The irony? The very event that night had been meant to honor royal unity. A private gathering in celebration of the late Queen's favorite charity. Yet within those walls, the family that once symbolized composure and duty fractured in a way that even the most practiced royal staff didn't know how to handle. Catherine's heart broke as she led her daughter away from the hushed voices behind her. She didn't look back at Meghan, not once. She couldn't. She later told a close confidant, quietly, tearfully, that she'd never seen Charlotte so shaken. It wasn't just the words, she said. It was the way they were spoken. Sharp, cold, like she'd done something terrible just by being herself. In the dimly lit corridor, Catherine knelt down to her daughter's level. "Look at me, darling," she whispered, wiping the tears from Charlotte's cheeks. The little girl sniffled, trying to compose herself the way she'd seen her mother do countless times. But her lip trembled. "Did I make her angry, Mummy?" she asked. That question, soft and wounded, hit Catherine like a blade. "No, my love," she said. "You did nothing wrong." And that was true. But behind that soothing tone, behind the calm she wore like armor, Catherine's mind was racing. Because she knew that within minutes, this incident wouldn't stay contained. Nothing inside Windsor ever did. Staff would talk, words would twist, and the story of Meghan and Charlotte's confrontation would grow its own wings. But what she couldn't have known then was how that story would spiral far beyond the palace. into a full-blown scandal that would redefine Meghan's relationship with the royal family forever. Back in the drawing room, the tension was unbearable. Meghan tried to regain composure, but William's glare remained fixed, unrelenting. Harry hovered, torn between two worlds, his brother's fury and his wife's mortified silence. "It's just a misunderstanding," he repeated weakly, his voice echoing off the marble. But William didn't answer. He simply turned his gaze toward the doorway, the one his wife and daughter had just exited, and then back to Meghan. That silent comparison said more than words ever could, and Meghan knew it. When Catherine and Charlotte reached the royal nursery, a small team of aides had already been alerted. A warm blanket, a soft toy, protocol disguised as care. But Charlotte didn't want comfort. She wanted to understand. "Did I make Aunt Meghan sad?" she whispered to her nanny. Those words spread faster than anyone could have expected. Within an hour, 3 staff members had quietly told their superiors what they'd overheard. By morning, the story had reached the king's private secretary. Within 2 days, the phrase "the Charlotte incident" was being murmured in hallways that were supposed to be silent. It's strange, isn't it? One misunderstanding, one moment of tension, can become a wildfire in a family built on image. And when that family is royal, that wildfire burns in secret first, feeding on whispers and speculation until it's ready to explode in public. Meanwhile, Catherine stayed with Charlotte until she fell asleep that night, stroking her hair and replaying the event in her mind over and over. How had it come to this? She'd given Meghan so many chances, so many quiet moments of kindness. The shared teas, the reassurances, the bridge building that the world never saw. But this felt like betrayal. Not just against her, but against her child. By the time William joined her later that evening, the anger had solidified into something colder. He found her sitting beside Charlotte's bed, watching their daughter sleep. "I won't have her near them again," he said quietly. Catherine didn't argue. She didn't need to. But if you think that decision was made in isolation, think again. Because what came next was a series of deliberate, calculated moves, the kind the royal family executes when protecting its own. Within 48 hours, Meghan's upcoming attendance at an official charity function was postponed. Her security clearance quietly reviewed. On the surface, it looked like routine scheduling adjustments. Inside the palace, everyone knew exactly what it meant. Harry, however, didn't. At least, not at first. He only found out about the fallout when a palace aide informed him that Meghan's name had been removed from a guest list. His reaction was immediate, furious. "This is ridiculous," he reportedly shouted. Over what? A misunderstanding? But William wasn't budging. He'd drawn the line. "It's not a misunderstanding when it involves my child," he said. And that's the moment the royal rift turned into an unbridgeable chasm. The tension extended far beyond the family. Staff who had once tried to stay neutral now chose sides. Some believed Meghan had been unfairly judged, a victim of her own tone in a family that valued restraint over authenticity. Others whispered that it was the moment the mask slipped, that the charm the Duchess once wielded so effortlessly had finally cracked. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because Charlotte, sweet and sensitive as she is, didn't want her father angry. A few days later, she left a small note on William's desk. In her careful handwriting, she wrote, "Please don't be cross. I still like her." William kept that note, tucked it away. It broke his heart, but it also strengthened his resolve, because he saw in those few words the very reason he had to act. Charlotte had forgiven Meghan, but he couldn't, because to him, it wasn't just about a moment of temper. It was about a pattern, a dangerous one, and he wasn't wrong to think that. Behind closed doors, Meghan was furious. She felt humiliated, cornered. "They're making me the villain again," she reportedly told a friend. "It's always my fault, no matter what happens." Her publicist urged her to stay quiet, but her frustration was palpable. And when Meghan is angry, she strategizes. Insiders say she began reaching out to certain sympathetic journalists, the kind who'd always been kind to her narrative. The idea wasn't to spill everything, but to plant seeds. To imply that she was once again being unfairly painted as the aggressor. But that decision, that impulse to control the story, would backfire spectacularly. Because what Meghan didn't know was that the palace already had something far more powerful than any headline. A recording. The same surveillance footage from that Windsor room. It wasn't meant to be incriminating. It was standard security protocol, used to ensure the safety of guests. But when palace security reviewed the footage after the incident, at William's quiet request, they found exactly what he described. The tone, the look, the moment Charlotte's face fell. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was undeniable. The recording became what insiders called the forbidden file. Only 3 people saw it: William, Catherine, and King Charles. It was never shared, never leaked, but it was enough to convince the king that William's request for a permanent ban wasn't emotional. It was justified. And yet, even now, no one in the public knows what Meghan actually said. Some claim it was a cruel comment about Charlotte's behavior. Others whisper that it touched on lineage, on titles, something no one outside that family would dare repeat. What is certain is this. After watching that footage, Charles reportedly said only 4 words: "We have no choice." That phrase would set into motion one of the quietest but most devastating royal punishments in modern history. From that moment forward, Meghan was no longer part of the royal inner circle. Invitations stopped. Access ended. Photographs from past events were gradually archived. Even her name, once printed alongside Harry's in official programs, began to disappear. It wasn't a public execution. It was erasure, slow, deliberate, permanent. And Meghan felt it. Every cold silence, every unanswered call. She told friends she didn't understand why she was being treated like an outcast. "It's like I've been deleted," she said once, voice shaking. But deletion was exactly what the royal family wanted. You might ask, why didn't Harry intervene more forcefully? Why didn't he fight harder for his wife? The answer is simple: because he couldn't. Not this time. He'd defended her through interviews, documentaries, and royal feuds, but when it came to Charlotte, even he knew the battle was lost before it began. A father defending his daughter outweighs a brother defending his wife. Always. The weeks that followed were strange. Catherine and William carried on publicly as though nothing had happened, their smiles intact, their public image unbroken. But in private, the trust was gone. Any hope of reconciliation with Meghan evaporated. And Charlotte, young, resilient Charlotte, carried on too. Her tutors said she grew quieter for a while, more introspective. But children heal faster than adults, and soon she was laughing again. Still, every time someone mentioned Meghan's name, she'd look away. The image of that night stayed with her. For Meghan, the image of being shut out would stay too. And when she realized she could no longer control the narrative inside the palace, she made a decision that would change everything again. To take the battle public. She didn't announce it outright, not yet. But she began drafting something. A letter. One that would land on the king's desk weeks later. And that letter would not only reignite the royal feud, it would expose everything the palace had tried to bury. Because in it, Meghan didn't just defend herself. She made a claim that shocked everyone who read it. And that claim would make the king himself question whether the footage, that forbidden file, should remain buried. But what did Meghan write in that letter that made even the calmest royal aides panic? That's what comes next. Because the letter wasn't just a plea. It was a threat, and it would set the stage for the next royal explosion. What finally makes a man who has been silent for years explode? What takes the calmest, most disciplined royal, a man trained since birth to never raise his voice, never show his anger, and turns him into someone who draws a permanent line between family and exile? For Prince William, that breaking point had a name: Meghan Markle. You could say it started long before the night at Windsor. That evening wasn't a spark. It was an eruption. The volcano had been rumbling for years. Every interview, every headline, every accusation had chipped away at William's patience until there was almost nothing left to give. And when Charlotte's tears hit the marble floor that night, it wasn't just the sound of a child crying. It was the sound of a man realizing he'd lost his last ounce of restraint. William had endured more than most would believe. The Netflix specials, the Oprah interview, the constant insinuations that his wife was cold, that his father was cruel, that the family he had devoted his life to protecting was broken from within. He'd taken it all with clenched teeth and steady posture. But this was different. This was personal. It was his daughter. When William left that Windsor room, he didn't storm off in fury. He walked, slow, deliberate, silent. But every step he took down that corridor echoed with years of frustration. You could almost hear the words building in his throat. the ones he'd swallowed for so long. Enough. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the corridors fell quiet, William stood alone in his private study. The weight of centuries pressed on his shoulders, not metaphorically, but truly. The portraits of monarchs past stared down at him, their painted eyes reminding him that kings are judged not by how they love, but by what they protect. And he was about to protect something far more precious than any crown, his family's dignity. When Catherine entered, her face pale but composed, he didn't turn at first. She closed the door behind her quietly, letting the heavy wood muffle the world outside. "She's asleep," she said softly. "Charlotte's all right." He nodded, still looking out the window. The gardens below were quiet, moonlight spilling across the hedges like silver threads. "It's not all right," he said finally. "It never will be, not after this." Catherine stepped closer. "William." But he cut her off, not in anger, but with finality. "I've spent years defending them. I've tolerated things my mother would never have allowed. But this," his voice trailed off. When he turned, there was no rage in his eyes, only exhaustion. "She humiliated our daughter, Kate, in front of everyone. And Harry stood there and did nothing." It wasn't just an outburst. It was the moment the man who had always chosen diplomacy decided that the time for quiet tolerance was over. You see, William isn't a man of impulsive anger. He's strategic. When he acts, it's not heat, it's calculation. And that night, he made a decision that would change the shape of the royal family for good. The next morning, William requested a private audience with the king, not as a son to a father, but as the heir to the monarch. The meeting took place in Clarence House, a place known for its stillness, where serious conversations unfold behind closed curtains. Charles was waiting when William arrived. He was expecting anger. He wasn't expecting resolve. "She made Charlotte cry," William said, not sitting down. "In front of staff. In front of guests. In front of me." Charles sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "William, these things." "No," William's tone was sharp, but steady. "You don't understand. This wasn't another misunderstanding. This was deliberate. She spoke to my daughter like she was nothing." The king said nothing. He didn't need to. William wasn't looking for comfort. He was delivering a verdict. "I want her banned," William said. "From Windsor, from Sandringham, from anywhere the family gathers." It was the first time in modern royal history that an heir had asked the reigning monarch to formally exile a family member without public scandal forcing it. Charles was silent for a long moment. "That's a severe request," he said finally. William's voice didn't waver. So was what she did. There was no yelling, no dramatic threats, just quiet conviction. The king studied his son, perhaps seeing in him shades of his late mother, Diana's fire, but wrapped in royal steel. He nodded slowly. "If that's what you believe is necessary, it will be done." That was it. The decision that would alter the royal landscape for decades was made not with shouting, but with stillness. Yet something about that meeting unsettled Charles. Later, he would tell an aide that William's composure was more frightening than any anger he'd ever seen. "It wasn't rage," he said. "It was clarity, and that's far more dangerous." Back in Windsor, the staff began quietly executing orders. Meghan's name was removed from internal security lists. Her invitations to upcoming royal engagements were rescinded under scheduling conflicts. The change was so seamless, so quiet, that if you weren't watching closely, you'd never know a lifetime ban had just been enacted. But Meghan knew. She could feel it in the silence. No calls, no replies, no warmth. And when Harry tried to reach his brother, the line was cold. The two men who once spoke every day now communicated through aides. You'd think William would have felt relief, wouldn't you? But that's not what came. Instead, there was something heavier, something like grief. Because while he stood by his decision, he couldn't shake the echo of Charlotte's small voice asking, "Did I make her angry, Daddy?" He didn't have the heart to tell her that sometimes people hurt others not because of who they are, but because of what they represent. And Charlotte represented everything Meghan could never be again. Beloved by the public, adored by the family, and born into the grace Meghan had once tried to claim. As weeks passed, William's resolve hardened. In public, he was impeccable, smiling at engagements, shaking hands, delivering speeches. But in private, the wound festered. Because even though Meghan was gone, her shadow lingered. Every headline that defended her felt like an insult to Charlotte. Every reporter who asked about reconciliation felt like a provocation. One evening, he confided in a close friend, a man he trusted implicitly. "They'll never understand," he said quietly. "It wasn't about titles or press. It was about a child. My child. How much of royal life is truly private?" That question has haunted Buckingham Palace since the first flashbulb caught Queen Elizabeth outside Westminster Abbey nearly a century ago. But privacy within the palace walls is something altogether different, or at least it was supposed to be. That is, until one small, unassuming camera became the silent witness to the night everything changed. Imagine this: the drawing room at Windsor, elegant but not ostentatious. Warm light from crystal chandeliers, the faint hum of conversation, the scent of expensive perfume and polished wood. And up in the corner, barely visible to the human eye, a pinhole camera, part of standard royal security protocol, installed after a series of threats years earlier. It wasn't meant for scandal. It wasn't meant for gossip. But that night, it recorded the most damaging 10 minutes in modern royal history. No one noticed it. Not Meghan. Not William. Not even the staff. Only the chief of security and his 2 assistants knew it was active. They reviewed footage periodically for safety, nothing more. Until the morning after Charlotte's tears stained the night. That morning, William's personal aide, Simon Firehurst, a discreet man with decades of service, requested a review of the room's surveillance for incident documentation. He didn't elaborate. Within hours, a copy of the recording was in a sealed envelope, hand-delivered to William himself. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he waited. When Catherine came to his study that evening, her face still drawn from sleepless worry, he handed her the envelope. "I haven't watched it yet," he said. She hesitated. "Do you want to?" He nodded slowly. "We need to know the truth. Not the whispers. The truth." And so they watched. The footage, time-stamped at 8:47 p.m., began innocently enough. Guests mingled, glasses clinked, laughter floated through the air. Meghan was visible near the center of the frame, dressed elegantly, smiling, at first. Charlotte approached moments later, tiny hands holding what appeared to be a decorative ribbon she'd been given to deliver to Meghan. And then it happened. Meghan's posture shifted. Her shoulders straightened, her expression hardened. She took a small step forward, the kind of movement you make when you're asserting control of a space. Her lips moved quickly, her expression sharp. Even without audio, it was unmistakable. Her tone was harsh. Charlotte froze, her face falling. Catherine stepped into view just as Charlotte's chin began to tremble. Then Meghan turned away, exhaling sharply, while William, half off-screen, reacted, his body language tense, protective. And then Catherine led her daughter out of frame. The whole thing lasted less than 20 seconds. But those 20 seconds were enough. When the clip ended, the room was silent. Catherine stared at the blank screen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. William leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the black reflection of his own face in the monitor. "She did it," he said quietly. "Exactly as they said." Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. "And now everyone will believe you." But here's the thing. They couldn't let anyone believe it. Not publicly. The monarchy thrives on discretion. To leak that footage, to confirm that one of their own had crossed that line, would mean shattering the royal code of silence. The footage wasn't just evidence. It was dynamite. William ordered the file sealed. It was placed in an encrypted vault labeled Sensitive, Windsor Engagement. Only he, Catherine, and the king would ever have access. And yet, even within those trusted walls, whispers began to form. Someone had seen it. Someone had told someone else. And by the end of the week, a few palace insiders knew enough to start asking dangerous questions. Why was the footage being hidden? Why protect Meghan at all? What were they afraid of revealing? Inside Buckingham, loyalty and curiosity are eternal enemies. And this footage became their battlefield. Meanwhile, King Charles was briefed by his private secretary. "We've reviewed the Windsor recording," the secretary said carefully. "It supports the Prince of Wales's account." Charles sighed, steepling his fingers. "And the Duchess? She's unaware it exists." "Let's keep it that way," the king replied. But secrets, especially royal ones, rarely stay buried. 2 weeks later, an encrypted email was sent from a palace address to a private journalist known for royal leaks. Attached was a blurry screenshot. A single frame from the footage. Charlotte mid-blink. Meghan leaning slightly forward, the moment frozen in silence. The email had no signature. No explanation. Just 4 words. You should see this. That image never made it to the press, at least, not directly. The journalist, wary of legal retaliation, held on to it. But the existence of that frame started to circulate through underground networks of royal reporters. Quietly, cautiously, enough for the rumor to take root. There was proof of Meghan's outburst. When Meghan's team caught wind of it, panic ensued. They can't have anything, she told her PR advisor during a call. There were no cameras. The advisor hesitated. It's a royal residence. There are always cameras. Meghan fell silent. That night, she called Harry into her study. If there's footage, we have to get ahead of it, she said. We can't let them use it against us. Harry looked tired. Meg, if there is footage, maybe we should. Should what? She snapped. Apologize? Admit to something I didn't do. He didn't answer. He just rubbed his face and said softly, they're never going to stop, are they? But she wasn't listening. She was already thinking ahead. Damage control. Narrative management. Spin. Back in London, palace officials were doing the same, but for very different reasons. The footage, they realized, was not just about protecting Charlotte or punishing Meghan. It was about safeguarding the monarchy itself. If the public ever saw one royal berating another royal child, especially one as beloved as Charlotte, the backlash would be catastrophic, not just for Meghan, but for the entire institution. So the footage stayed locked away, hidden, guarded, and spoken of only in whispers. Yet, not everyone agreed with the decision to bury it. Princess Anne, ever the realist, reportedly told the king, if you start hiding things for one, you'll be hiding them for all. That never ends well. Charles frowned, but said nothing. Still, Anne's warning lingered. Because the palace wasn't just hiding Meghan's misstep, they were now complicit in keeping a secret that could, one day, destroy their credibility. And as the weeks passed, that secret began to rot from within. William became obsessed with ensuring the file stayed secure. He had the archives encryption changed, the access logs wiped, even the servers relocated to a restricted section of the palace IT department. But paranoia is contagious. The more he tried to contain it, the more attention it drew. Staff whispered about the file. Some thought it was financial. Others thought it involved state security. Only a few suspected the truth, and those few started talking in private circles. One of them was a mid-level communications officer named Daniel Reeves. Loyal, competent, but curious. He'd overheard enough fragments to piece the puzzle together. One night, after too many drinks, he told a friend in confidence, there's a tape. That's all I'll say. And it's worse than you think. Within a week, he was reassigned to a Foreign Office post. The palace doesn't tolerate loose lips. But Meghan, ever resourceful, still found out. Through channels of her own, she learned the footage wasn't just rumor, it existed. And she demanded answers. She wrote to the king himself, addressing him formally but sharply. If there are recordings from Windsor, I have a right to view them, as I was present. Any withholding of that footage constitutes a violation of my privacy. Charles didn't respond directly. Instead, William did, through a short, typed letter from his office. It contained only one line. For the sake of all involved, this matter is considered closed. That was when Meghan decided to fight back. She began drafting her own letter, not to William, not even to Catherine, but to the king. A letter that would mix apology, accusation, and threat all in one. The kind of letter that couldn't be ignored. And it would change everything. Because when that letter landed on the king's desk, it didn't just reopen old wounds, it exposed new ones. In it, Meghan claimed something no one expected, something that, if true, could rewrite the entire narrative of that night. She claimed that the palace wasn't hiding her guilt. It was hiding theirs. But what could she possibly mean by that? What could the royal family have to hide that would make even the king look shaken when he read her words? You're about to find out. Because that letter, written in anger, sealed with precision, and leaked with intent, would ignite a war that not even Buckingham Palace could control. And once it was opened, there would be no going back. They say Catherine never yells, never loses her temper, never lets emotion break through that polished royal composure. But those who truly know her, the few who've seen her behind closed doors, when the cameras are gone and the palace halls fall silent. Know that her quiet fury is the most terrifying of all. After that night at Windsor, Catherine didn't explode. She didn't even raise her voice. But every move she made afterward was deliberate, precise, cold. She didn't need to shout to make her message clear. She simply withdrew her warmth. And in a family where silence carries the weight of thunder, that was louder than any words she could have spoken. Picture her the morning after. The sky was pale, streaked with gray, and the castle felt unusually still. Staff avoided eye contact. The scent of roses from the courtyard drifted faintly through the open windows of her private parlor, where Catherine sat alone with a single cup of untouched tea. She wasn't angry for herself. She was angry for Charlotte. Her daughter's innocence had been bruised, not by the press, not by the public, but by someone who should have been family. That betrayal ran deep. For years, Catherine had been the one to extend grace, to bridge the unbridgeable gap between Meghan and the rest of the royals. She'd offered advice, support, and understanding even when the rest of the palace turned cold. She had believed in reconciliation. But now, that belief was gone. William entered quietly. "You didn't eat," he said. She didn't look up. "I wasn't hungry." He sat across from her, his tie slightly undone, exhaustion in every movement. "I've spoken to Father. It's done." Her eyes lifted slowly. "She's banned." He nodded. "For good." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, "Good." It was the calmest word she'd ever spoken, and yet it carried the weight of an entire decade of unspoken frustration. But here's the thing. Catherine wasn't just angry. She was hurt. She'd trusted Meghan once. She'd welcomed her into the family, stood beside her at ceremonies, defended her against the British tabloids when the criticism became cruel. She'd believed Meghan's tears when she said the press had broken her spirit. She'd believed that maybe, just maybe, they could have been allies. And now, all that faith had turned to ash. In private, Catherine confided in her mother, Carol Middleton, who visited her days later. "It's not about anger," she told her. "It's about disappointment." I thought she understood what it means to protect family. Her mother squeezed her hand. "Some people mistake kindness for weakness, darling. You've learned that the hard way." But Catherine didn't cry. She didn't rage. Instead, she began to act, quietly, methodically. She reached out to her closest aides, the ones she trusted with her image and her causes. "I want to focus all upcoming appearances on family initiatives," she instructed. "Parenting, childhood development, resilience. Those are our priorities now." She didn't need to mention why. Everyone in that room knew the message between the lines. This was about protecting children, especially royal ones, from emotional harm, even if the danger came from within. Every engagement that followed became a subtle statement. Every speech she gave about kindness and empathy was, in its own way, a blade wrapped in velvet. And the public noticed. Within weeks, headlines began shifting tone. Catherine's quiet strength. Princess of Wales protects the next generation. Grace under fire. She didn't have to address Meghan directly. The contrast spoke for itself. Meanwhile, inside the palace, Catherine's newfound firmness changed the dynamic. Staff who had once tiptoed around Meghan's moods now found reassurance in Catherine's resolve. The atmosphere at Kensington Palace became sharper, more focused. The unspoken rule was clear. Loyalty to the Princess of Wales was loyalty to the crown's future. But even as Catherine projected calm control, there were cracks forming beneath the surface, invisible ones that only William could see. Late at night, when the corridors went dark and the children were asleep, she'd sit by the window in silence, staring at the moonlight spilling across the courtyard. William would find her there sometimes, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. "She's just a child," she'd whisper. "She shouldn't have to see people that way. Not so soon." And William, though he wanted to comfort her, didn't know how. Because he wasn't just her husband now. He was the heir to the throne, the enforcer of the decision that broke their family's last thread of unity. Even King Charles noticed the change. During a private lunch, he told Camilla, "Catherine's different now. She's steel." Camilla smiled faintly. She had to be. You can't live in this family without learning to fight your battles quietly. But there was one thing Catherine hadn't done yet. One final act that would cement her quiet fury into royal record. She requested a private audience with the king. The meeting, unannounced and unrecorded, took place at Clarence's house late in the evening. Only one aide was permitted to escort her in. Charles greeted her warmly, but looked uneasy. "Catherine, my dear, I know this has been difficult." "This isn't about me," she interrupted gently. "It's about Charlotte." He nodded slowly. "Of course. I don't want this swept under the rug," she continued. "She's a child. She deserves to know that when someone wrongs her, even someone powerful, they face consequences." Charles hesitated. "You're asking for official acknowledgement?" Catherine met his gaze evenly. "No, I'm asking for protection. I don't want her ever near Meghan again. Not in photographs, not in ceremonies, not at any family event. Ever." It wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. Charles studied her for a long moment. Then, quietly, "It will be done." And so it was. From that day forward, the palace's event planners operated under a new, unspoken rule. Catherine and her children were never to be scheduled in proximity to Meghan Markle under any circumstance. Even charity events, once shared between the Wales and Sussex households, were quietly separated. But Catherine's fury didn't stop there. Her influence extended further, to the King's Communications Office, to press liaisons, to public perception itself. Slowly, carefully, the narrative shifted in her favor. Meghan, once seen as the wronged outsider, now became the difficult duchess who crossed a line no one else dared. And Catherine didn't have to say a single word to make it happen. It was poetic, really. The woman once accused of being too soft, too quiet, too accommodating had mastered the art of invisible retribution. She had turned the palace's most powerful weapon, silence, into her own shield. But beneath that calculated calm, there was still emotion. There was still pain. Catherine wasn't made of stone. Late one night, when William entered their bedroom after a long day of meetings, he found her sitting by the fireplace, a small piece of paper in her hand. It was Charlotte's note. The one she'd left weeks earlier. "Please don't be cross. I still like her." Catherine's voice broke when she spoke. "How do I explain to her that liking someone doesn't mean you let them hurt you?" William knelt beside her. "You don't have to. She'll see it one day." And she would. Because Charlotte, even at her young age, had inherited her mother's quiet strength. But for now, the silence around the incident grew thicker, heavier. It was supposed to protect them. Instead, it became a cage. Because in silence, resentment festers. And while Catherine built walls to keep Meghan out, those same walls trapped the entire family in a cold, careful tension that would only worsen when Meghan's letter arrived. That letter would pierce through the palace's silence like a blade. It would accuse, it would provoke, and it would carry a truth no one expected, a truth that would make even Catherine question everything she thought she knew about that night. Because what if Meghan wasn't the only one hiding something? And what if the person she was accusing wasn't William, but Catherine herself? When the letter arrived at Clarence's house, it didn't come in a royal courier's pouch. It came through a private channel, a handwritten envelope with Meghan's own looping script. On the front, it said simply, "For His Majesty's eyes only." No crest, no seal, just defiance wrapped in polite stationery. King Charles received it mid-morning, as he sat in his study with tea and his usual mountain of correspondence. He wasn't expecting anything unusual. But the moment his private secretary placed that envelope before him, something in the man's eyes told him this one was different. He opened it, read the first line, and stopped breathing for a moment. "Your Majesty, I am writing to you not as a former duchess, but as a woman who has been unfairly silenced." From that very first sentence, it was clear this wasn't a plea. It was a challenge. Charles leaned back in his chair, scanning the page. Meghan's handwriting, graceful and deliberate, wove between apology and accusation. She acknowledged the incident with Charlotte, but denied the version William and Catherine had presented. She claimed that the palace, in its rush to protect its image, had constructed a narrative that villainized her while concealing the emotional manipulation she herself had endured. Then came the line that chilled him. "There was another recording that night," she wrote. "One your family would rather keep buried. Not because it clears me, but because it reveals what truly happened before Charlotte cried." Charles froze. Another recording? He reread it twice. Meghan claimed that an aide had approached her days earlier with information about a second surveillance angle, a camera positioned in the hallway outside the drawing room. one that allegedly captured the moments before she raised her voice. According to her letter, that footage showed Catherine speaking sharply to her first, telling her to step back when Charlotte tried to hand over the ribbon. If true, it meant the event might not have been as simple as everyone believed. Charles didn't want to believe it, but he also couldn't ignore it. He set the letter down, tapping his fingers on the desk. "Get me the head of royal security," he said quietly. Within hours, a full review was underway. The palace IT team combed through archival drives, and sure enough,